You're watching another Nerd Stalker interview. Morning, this is Greg Boria, aka Social Greg on Twitter for the Nerd Stalker Media Network. And does the internet sleep? Today we speak with Dr. John Heidemann of USC's Information Sciences Institute to discuss his findings on why that answer is very important to you and the rest of the world. So quickly, a little bit about Dr. Heidemann. He's currently the senior project leader at USC's Information Sciences Institute. His research work on computing and the internet goes back to 1989 when he was in grad school at UCLA. And doing some background research, I found that his work has gone into a lot of mapping of the internet, which is very important. And he also is passionate about vocal music, which I found out. So on his wiki. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Anyway, good morning, John. Thanks for joining us here on Nurse Talk Live from USC Los Angeles, right?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm in Marina Del Rey.
Okay. Anyway, anything you want to tell the Nerd Stalker audience about yourself that I left out?
Not really. The one thing I'd add is, so this work, the sleeping work, is joint work with my student Lin Quan, who's now graduated, my graduated student, so he's back in China, working away hard, and a staff person here, Yuri Prodkin.
Ah, yes, I saw those names on your citation. So yeah, thanks for doing a lot of this. It's interesting work that I saw when it was the press release was sent out by USC a few weeks ago. So I understand you and a team of people at USC did the first kind of modern internet census in 2006, and it seems like a lot of your recent work was born out of that, right?
Yeah, we've been working on understanding the internet for quite a while now, and it started with this simple question, can we probe the whole internet, right?
Mm.
There's only 4 billion IP addresses, in IPv4 at least, and 4 billion is not a very big number, right? A computer can count to 4 billion in a second or so. So we've been working on this problem since 2003, and we started releasing census data from 2006. And when we say a census, we mean we probe the entire IPv4 address space, all the public unicast IP addresses, and it's pretty fun. And starting with that, it's led us on this path to trying to understand internet outages, and now trying to understand how the internet sleeps. So.
Wow, that's pretty cool. And so you'll be presenting a lot of these findings at the November 2014 ACM, or Association for of Computing Machinery
Yeah.
Internet Measurement Conference in Vancouver, right? So why are these findings important to like governments and policymakers?
Right. So the sleeping work, the diurnal work, is interesting because for a bunch of reasons. But particularly you ask about policymakers, and the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, when they established a broadband plan for the United States, actually set out an always-on internet as one of the goals they see, because for the United States, because they want to have an internet that you can just go up and use whenever you want, that you don't have to boot and log into AOL with your modem squealing at you and stuff. Um, and if you think about it, this is part of how it changes how people use the internet, right? If your internet is always on, it's easy to have a hangout whenever you want, as opposed to having to stop and think about it. And we get some of this with our cell phones, our mobile phones today, but getting it in the home with broadband has been a real eye opener. And so that's one example of a policy goal. But one of the things, but more than just the FCC's milestones, something that's always been a passion of mine is to understand, what does the internet tell us about our world? And if you're able to watch the internet around the world and see how it changes over time, that tells us some things. And so in our outage work, for example, we were able to see things like the Tohoku earthquake, that impact on Japan, and things like Hurricane Sandy, um, the impact of that on the Pacific, on the Atlantic coast, and also some international events. So we saw things like the Egyptian revolution, when they shut down the internet for a couple of days. And so this diurnal internet is some of our most recent work, where we're very interested in watching the internet as a whole and how it changes, and being able to see these daily changes, these diurnal changes that happen in some parts of the globe.
It's interesting. You brought up the Tohoku earthquake. It was pretty much documented that the connectivity mobile-wise in Japan actually was still pretty good, right?
Yeah, I've talked to some network operators following up to that. Some of them did amazingly well, and so I'm not an expert on the mobile network, but I know the backbone in Japan did very well, at least for the people who had properly prepared. What was interesting from me is we actually saw some of the is that the outages that we did see, and they weren't huge, but we saw some actually followed the earthquake by several hours, and I think the scientists who understand the seismic side of the problem said there were underwater landslides and stuff that actually resulted in cable cuts after the earthquake, after the fact.
Wow.
So I, I'm the our data at that time, our methodology for understanding outages was still in development. So that data our coverage was not as great as what we can do today.
Oh,
But
really?
I'm very excited by the opportunity to understand these events as they go forward in the future.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. Go
So at
ahead.
that time we were probing a sample of the internet. We probed about 2% of the internet, and currently in our current studies we probe about 4 million network blocks, we call them, /24s, or if you think if an IP address is 1.2.3.4, a /24 is 1.2.3. So
Mm-hmm.
256 adjacent addresses. So we probe 4 million of those every 11 minutes. Um,
Now, can you go into, you mentioned in the article, in the press release, that, you could detect outages versus the internet going to sleep. And so how do you do that? Or can you describe some of the methodology towards that?
sure. So our outage detection system probes all of these network blocks every 11 minutes. And we try to be very careful in how we do that probing because we want to be nice to people. Um, um, we don't want to be flooding your network with lots of traffic. And we still get a few number of complaints, but usually they're from people who don't understand that 1 or 2 pings an hour is uh, uh, not a lot of traffic, right? It's far less than a tweet. But that's a problem. But so we try to be really careful in how we probe and probe very lightly. But over the course of time, we're able to probe the whole internet. And in this diurnal work, what we realized is if you analyze that over time, so over the course of a day, you actually get a quite good picture of how the whole network, how each block is evolving over the course of the day. And we can see actually changes in a block, changes in how many IP addresses are lit up or active or responding to us, technically, at different times of the day.
Yeah, and you have a lot of interesting mapping work, so maybe you want to share that with the audience here and kind of describe, some of the mapping of what it means to have an internet that's basically asleep versus,
Sure.
out. You know.
Sure, let me show that is. So I think probably the easiest way, let me do a screen share and I can
Okay,
show, this is on our web page. So our web page is, oh, this is on my private web page. Just a minute.
no problem. No, it was really interesting because I think that if you go to their website and you know they have a lot of interesting visual work that they've done in in the actual looking at these IP addresses, as John said, and trying to figure out exactly what these findings mean visually. It's a lot easier to look at something visually actually. So
Right, so our web page is isi.edu/ant/diurnal, all in lowercase. And if you want to see the video or the animation, this is a month of data that we took um, mapping the globe, and we've taken each IP address and mapped it to a physical location. And so let me start this here. There's a title and
yeah.
credits. We can skip over that part. But what you can see, every 11 minutes we have a frame of this video, and you can see the day and night cycle go around. And the interesting thing to watch is in China and India and Eastern Europe and South America, you can see those parts of the map go blue and red. So when it's blue, that means there's fewer than average number of IPs that respond to us. And when it's red, there's more than average. And it's swinging by, it varies by block, but it swings by, as much as 20% in either direction, which is a pretty big shift. And if you look at this compared to the day-night cycle, if I stop, if I pause it for a minute, so you can see in China right now it's just about dusk, and you can see most of China is red because people like to use the internet in the evening or in the early afternoon. And in fact, you can watch a little bit further, so now we're into early morning hours. It's just about dawn in China, and you can see it's turning blue because hopefully even hackers go to sleep. And so it's fun to watch this and see some of the insights that one gets by seeing how the internet evolves over time.
I can even see where people know where to put server farms and stuff.
Yeah, you can think about how this represents load changing over the course of the day, and cloud operators take that into account. But it's fun to be able to see this from our data comes from a single PC running in our lab here, so it's neat that an individual can figure this stuff out.
Yeah, and this is just using simple pinging technology, right? I mean, you're just pinging the internet address, but there's millions of them as you're doing it, right?
That's right, and it's good to comment on that because, of course, the pings are not perfect, and so we know that pings are blocked by firewalls, and pings can't see through NAT boxes, so I can see your home router, but I can't see your computers inside your home, which is both good and bad. So this methodology is not perfect, but it is a pretty good approach to study the internet, and we've actually done studies to judge the effectiveness of this and growing out of the census work. And our judgment is we see about 2/3 of all the computers on the network. Two-thirds of all the public IP addresses that are lit up. So I can't see all of the stuff that's in private networks.
All right.
And the final thing I should say about the video, I commented about India and Eastern Europe and China. The contrast in the United States and in Western Europe is you see they're always white for the most part, and that's because in the West, where we have better economic means and where the government has been advocating an always-on internet for a while, what we're seeing there is everybody leaves their cable modems on all the time, and so you're probably still turning laptops on and off in the evening, but what we see is that cable modem that's always left on.
Oh, that's interesting, actually. Wow.
Yeah.
That's true. That means we're we have the ability to connect at any time because our devices might be we might be asleep and the devices might not be used, but the actual connection from our modem is actually on. Wow.
Right. It's kind of fun. And then just to look, there's one other video that's kind of interesting here. Let me make this a little bigger. We zoomed in on Eastern Europe, where we can really see the difference in the things that I was talking about. So if we look at Warsaw and Minsk, so Poland and Belarus, you can see in this plot the two plots correspond to these particular regions of the globe, and you can see Poland is pretty stable. It has can't quite see it. So it's plus or minus about 4% over the course of a day, whereas Belarus is going plus or minus 15%. So this is what's going on around the globe.
Wow, that's really cool. That's great work you did there.
Yeah, so it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I had another question. You've been monitoring this for a long time, since 2003, you said, but since you did your initial census data in 2006, what changes have you seen in the internet between 2006 and today, which is almost 10 years, right?
That's a great question, and probably the biggest change we saw was that let me get the date right. So in February of 2011, IANA, which is the organization, the Internet Authority for Assigned Names and Numbers, it's the organization that gives out IP addresses.
Mm.
And in February 2011, they gave out the last IP addresses. Now that doesn't mean we're out of luck completely, because they give them to the what's called the regional internet registries, and the registries give them to ISPs, and the ISPs give them to us.
I see.
But that was a real eye-opener for the industry, and it's something that people have been anticipating for a long time. But um, that was a sea change, in that before that time, if you wanted an IP address, you could ask for it and you would get it. Now, if you want an IP address, somebody else has to give you their IP address, and that means IP addresses are much more IPv4 addresses are much more precious today than they were in 2005 or so.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the value has gone up for them then at that point.
Yeah, and you can see there's a well-known case where Microsoft purchased many IP addresses from Nortel for several dollars an IP address. So if you think about the value of these IP addresses, if you're sitting on 64,000 of them, that might be worth some actual money.
Oh man, I can't imagine that, but it's
Yeah.
true. I mean, actually, it's interesting. With these company acquisitions, you would get their IP addresses as well. So that's kind of
Yeah,
interesting.
people work very, very carefully about that. And
Yeah.
you were asking what changes we've seen. So one thing I noticed is before that time, the density of IP addresses, how much they were used, was reasonably flat, right? But as we approached that transition, and certainly since then, we've seen the internet is slowly filling in. People are using more of the IP addresses that they already have. And that's what happens at any time of scarcity, right? You do better with what you have. Um, the really interesting question is, I mean, networking people are certainly aware of the number of addresses we have, and so they've been planning for IPv6 for many, many years, right? And there's always been a challenge, right? Why should we change to IPv6? IPv4 is working fine. Now that we've transitioned and IP addresses are much more precious, I think people are finally realizing the cost of continuing to use IPv4, the cost in terms of managing what you have more carefully, and things like that. That's finally a little more easy to appreciate. And so we're starting to see, I think, greater uptick in the use of IPv6 in the recent years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've been talking about that transition for a long time.
They have, and there's been skepticism and optimism and skepticism, but
Wow. Yeah. No, thanks. Anyway, let's close off the interview. That's a great demo you gave us, and
thank you.
gave a really good overview of a lot of your work that you're doing, and a lot of great work down at USC. So, how do people contact you, John, and find out more about a lot of your research and your group at USC?
So I think for folks interested in the work, the best choice is to go to our website. So it's isi.edu/ant is my research group's website. And we have web pages you can browse if you want to look at the internet census and see. You can type in your address and see where you are, and you can watch the video. And if you're a researcher, all of our data we make available at no charge to other researchers. So if you want to dig into the data, talk to me. My email address is on the site, or you can contact me. Okay.
Yeah, and to everyone out there, John's an interesting guy because when I looked at, when I was researching the article for this interview and his article, his blog is a wiki page, and it really goes to show you how he's very thoughtful about how he wants to get at his data, and he explains that in his wiki page. And I thought that was kind of old school, new school type of thing, where it's actually refreshing in one way because you actually can get at that information very easily in the way he's actually presented it, actually.
Well, I hate to say it, I actually have two blogs. My project blog is on WordPress, which is nice and simple because other people have to use it. And I think you'll see the number of posts to my personal blog are much smaller than my the posts to the public blog. But I
Yeah,
do.
a lot of good links there. A lot of good links there, John. I've looked at a couple of them, so I
Cool.
think don't apologize for having a minimalistic attitude towards presenting information. I think you also kind of boil it down to you wanted control over your information, which was a really interesting thing. I thought when I read in your personal blog because you opted not to put it in a database, so that was kind of cool. I
Yeah.
thought, you
Well,
know,
it's interesting the choices we make, cloud versus not, and database versus. There's a lot of different perspectives on that, but that's a whole other
Yeah,
discussion.
we'll do another interview about that sometime. So anyway, we'll close it off. And that was Dr. John Heidemann of the Information Sciences Institute at USC, researching the internet across the globe. So this is Greg Gloria, aka Social Greg, on Twitter for the Nerd Stalker Media Network, where we believe in tech, startups, design, and you. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and be careful out there. Thanks again, John.
Okay, thank you very much. All the best.